In this video, I'm going to show you how to replace your oil pan on this Toyota Camry with a 2.5 liter 4-cylinder engine. Let's get started. To start, I want to drain the oil. Grab a 14mm socket or wrench and remove your drain plug. This shouldn't be extremely tight, and once you break it free, you might need a couple extra turns here, but you should be able to unthread it by hand. Unthread this most of the way with your tool, and then you should be able to eventually grab it by hand. When you remove this, hold pressure on it until it gets to the last thread, and when it does, pull it away suddenly, and that will avoid any splashing that occurs because this is going to come out pretty fast. Drain this into a collection bucket. This is good enough. There will always be oil left at the bottom of the oil pan. I just wanted to get most of it out. So thread this back in so it stops dripping. I'm going to snug it up, and then we can remove the oil pan. Okay, wipe the drippage so it doesn't drip on you, and then grab a 10mm socket, take all the bolts off that hold this oil pan on. Now take a 10mm socket and remove all the bolts and the 2 mounting nuts that hold this oil pan on. These should not be very tight. If your socket has a hard time fitting over the hardware, make sure you tap it on. You want a good grip on that socket, otherwise you'll strip out the head of the bolts. So this was actually supposed to be a stud with a mounting nut. If you didn't notice, the whole stud came out. That's okay, we can fix that. I can show you how to get that stud out and put it back into the engine side. So typically this should remain here, and it just helps you line up the oil pan when you put it back on. That's what that's for. This one right here is another stud with a mounting nut. This one also, the stud might come out. Yep, I'll show you once again how to take that off. There's one more up front here, for which you may need a swivel. One last bolt right up against the side of the subframe here. This one you definitely need a swivel for. There we go. Now the oil pan is basically just stuck on here with RTV, but before I peel it off, I'm going to put a couple bolts back in, just a few threads, so that if it does pop off all of a sudden, it doesn't fall to the ground, especially since there's still oil in it. I don't want it splashing everywhere. So I'm just going to put a bolt there and another bolt somewhere on the other side. All right, just a few threads. You want to make sure you still leave enough room for the oil pan to come down so it can actually break free. And now take a pry bar and very carefully pry it down. You don't want to ruin the engine block, basically. This is aluminum, so it can crack the oil pan we are replacing, so if it gets damaged, that's fine. But start with a pry bar or a screwdriver and a hammer, and hammer it right in here. Once you get it in a little bit, there you go. You should be able to kind of pry it away. Looks like I'm reaching the limits of this bolt, so I'm going to take it out. Okay, it's time to take that other bolt out. Now peel it away, but don't tilt it down because, like I said, there is still oil in here. And there it is. I'm going to wipe this off just so it doesn't drip on me while I scrape the old RTV off. And I recommend a razor blade because it's gentle enough to not damage the aluminum. This is fairly soft material, so you don't want to use a sanding disc or a wire wheel on this. but it's also sharp enough to remove said RTV. So scrape all of this away, and if you don't get it looking brand new and perfect, that's okay. You're looking to just get most of this off. I'm just gonna go all the way around and get as much RTV off as I can. If you have a gasket scraper, make sure it's sharpened and in good condition, and this usually helps you scrape this off a little bit easier because it's, well, easier to hold and operate rather than a smaller razor blade that can get slippery once it's oiled up. Now I'm done cleaning up the surface. Like I said, it will not look perfect, but it is as clean as it's gonna get. Now I'm just gonna grab a rag and wipe it down to remove any remaining debris and oil that's dripping down. Try not to get any debris inside of the engine here. I'm just gonna go all the way around. And then I'm going to grab a clean rag with brake parts cleaner on it to degrease this surface, because RTV will not stick properly to oil. So you wanna make it nice and dry so that the new RTV can seal up nicely. So having said that, this is all wiped down. So let's grab a clean rag. When you do this, do not spray brake parts cleaner directly in here. Spray it on your rag, soak it down, and then wipe it. Now I will wipe this again right before the oil pan goes on, but this is going to basically finish up my cleaning process here. Just gonna go all the way around, do as many passes as it takes, because you don't wanna have to pull this off because of a leaking gasket. Now I'm going to remove these mounting nuts off of these studs and put the studs back in the engine block so that I can have an easier time lining up the oil pan. To get these off, you'll just need a 10mm wrench that slides over the mounting bolt or the nut, and then an E5, that's an inverted Torx socket. You're gonna just hold the nut and thread the stud inward. This might be a little bit difficult because it's gonna keep wanting to fall, but threading the stud in will make it so it eventually unthreads off of the mounting nut. I did already spray this with rust penetrant. Hopefully that helps. As you can see, this is working. And it looks like we pretty much got to the end of the stud. So this is going to be a little tricky here because it's still fairly stiff. Now because the mounting nut is still stuck, but I'm out of stud basically, I can't grab it with my socket anymore, I'm going to put some needle nose locking pliers right in the center of this. There is actually a little groove that has no threads, and you can safely clamp onto it as long as you don't clamp onto the threads. Hold that, and then you can use your wrench or socket and finish removing this. Now sure, you could have done this from the beginning if you didn't have an inverted Torx socket, but I guess I did it with the socket. Anyway, there's this. Set this aside. I'm going to clean up the ends of the threads here just a little bit, and we'll do the same exact thing to this one so that we can install it onto the engine. Okay, for this one, I'm actually going to go the other way first. This one is a little bit more rusty, so I'm going to wire brush these threads a little bit, and hopefully that will help me remove the mounting nut a little bit easier, because the rust is usually what prevents you from smoothly sliding it off. Okay, that's the end of the stud. So we'll clamp it on. Right in the middle, you want to make sure that you don't go on the threads. Clamp it on tight. Okay, so I'm going to thread it back in now that it's stuck and reapply some rust penetrant in hopes that that will help me out. You don't need a lot. Work it back and forth if needed. This usually cleans out the threads a little. There we go. Like I said, I'm going to clean up the ends of these threads so that the mounting nut can go on a lot easier when we reinstall the pan. And now let's put these into the engine. Now let's put these studs into the engine. This stud right here on the back side went right below the carrier bearing, this mount for the axle. And here's a tip. If you don't have an inverted Torx socket, so if you had to pull the mounting nuts off with locking pliers, what you can use is a 4mm socket, just a regular one. It will fit snug enough to just snug these up in the engine, And all you want to do is just bottom them out and then give them a little snug. The mounting nut at the end will actually clamp the whole thing down. So this one's installed. Let's go put the other one in. The other one was near the oil filter, but closer to the subframe here. You want to make sure you start these on by hand so that they don't cross thread. They are steel bolts going into aluminum, and once it bottoms out, just a little snug. You definitely don't want to cross thread those. Here we have the new oil pan. I'm going to take a clean rag and some brake parts cleaner and just degrease this surface where the RTV goes. And of course, if there's any debris inside the oil pan, you're going to want to either blow that out or wipe it off or whatever you have to do. Basically, you want to make sure it is clean and that this surface is degreased so that the RTV will stick properly. And at this point, I'm just going to lather it up. Don't put too much. A very thin bead will go a long way, because if you put too much, well, not only can it squish on the outside, which is no big deal, but it can also squish towards the inside, and you want to avoid that. Go on the inside of the mounting holes. Now we're ready to install the new oil pan with the fresh RTV, but you want to make sure it's nice and dry here. Oil did leak while we were doing everything else, so I'm going to give it one last wipe down with brake parts cleaner on a clean rag so that the new RTV can stick onto the surface properly. Otherwise, it will cause an oil leak. Other way. Bring in the pan, line it up with the studs. There we go. I like to wiggle it around just a little bit to get that RTV seated. I'm going to put in a bolt and thread it on as much as you can by hand to allow the pan to stay locked in place while you put the rest in. These should go in nice and smooth. If they don't, they're likely cross-threading, so fix that. Okay, that's on all the way. I'm going to put one on the back side here, and then probably one on here, kind of form a triangle with these fasteners to hold it on nice and tight. Okay, and one over here. Once you have those two on, you can probably let go, and then especially once you have the third one in. All right, let's put in all the rest of them. I'm not tightening them yet, I'm just bottoming them out. This one here is especially tricky because it is at an angle and you need a swivel for it. You want to make sure it does not cross thread. It's very easy to do that on this one. You want to just let that bolt follow its threads, and there you go. All these that have or that you need a swivel head socket for, always make sure you're not cross-threading. All right, now I'm going to go around and just snug these a little bit, and then we will come back with a torque wrench and torque them all down. It is important that these are properly tightened. Once again, I am not tightening them, I'm just squishing them down a little bit, making sure that that gasket maker can seal up. We'll give this about 5 minutes for the RTV to set and tack up, and then I will torque them all down. The torque for these is 7 foot-pounds, converts to 84 inch-pounds if you're curious. And if you don't have a torque wrench that can read and torque that low, just take that little ratchet and snug them up about 1/8 of a turn. That's pretty much all it is. 7 foot-pounds is not a lot. You don't want to break or strip these out. I'm also going to go in a cross pattern so I can squish this RTV down evenly. If I just tighten these, this will all squish out, and then the front might not be equal. So I just prefer going in a cross pattern. Doesn't matter where you start, as long as you follow the torque specs and the suggested sequence. As you can see, that's all it takes. It's really minimal pressure on these. Torque this one, and then for the other ones I do actually need a swivel. Swivels do alter the torque, so I'm going to try and get it as close as possible, but just so you know, when you put a swivel on, the torque wrench will not read exactly the same. You will most likely under tighten that bolt, so just give it a little extra. And then we have 2 in the front here that required a swivel. If you can get these without a swivel, well, that would be even better. Oops. Now that they're all torqued, I actually prefer to go around one more time. You can go in a circle this time, but that ensures that they are all still properly torqued, because sometimes as you squish this oil pan down by tightening them, some of the first ones will tend to loosen up as that RTV squishes and creates more slack. And those are already done. So there we go, oil pan is tight. I strongly recommend checking the tightness of the oil drain plug, because you never know, it's a brand new oil pan and the factory may not have torqued it to the proper spec yet. It might just be finger tight in here. So 25 foot-pounds. As you can see, it's still tightened up a little bit. So there you have it, now it's properly tightened. At this point, I strongly recommend changing your oil filter, located right here, because you are basically doing an oil change at this point, so I suggest putting a new oil filter on. We have already done that, so let's fill up the engine with oil. Now under the hood, you'll see your oil filler cap here. Unthread it, and you'll see right on it, it says that you need 0W20 oil for this engine. I'm just gonna set it aside. If you changed your filter, which I, like I said, highly recommend, it should take 4.6 quarts to fill this up properly. I'm gonna put my makeshift funnel here. And if you did not change your filter, maybe you just recently did an oil change, start with 4 quarts and then measure it on the dipstick. You don't wanna overfill this. Like I said, I'm gonna put 4.5 quarts or 4.6 quarts of 0W20 in here. Okay, last half a quart. I have a bottle here left over that is pretty much only half full. So I'm going to put this in. There we go. That's pretty good. Let's check it on the dipstick and make sure we're good. Put the oil cap back on, thread it on. When you tighten it, just give it a quick snug. It's easy to over tighten these, and then with heat cycles they actually get stuck. So just snug it up a little bit. Right here is your engine oil dipstick. Pull it up. Wipe it off as you remove it so that you can get a clean, accurate reading. Dip it back down in all the way and then pull it out. If you look at this, this is the full mark, this is the low mark over here. You want to make sure that you are pretty much at the full mark with the engine off, which we are, so that's perfect. Our 4.6 quarts was spot on. So I'm going to put this back in here. At this point, it's also a good idea to reset your maintenance reminder / oil change reminder because you pretty much have new oil in here. And other than that, turn the engine on, let it run, check for leaks, there shouldn't be any, and take it for a road test.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.